In 2023, the British Columbia government recorded a staggering 2,511 deaths to toxic drug overdoses, the highest annual death toll ever recorded. Every day, an average of 22 Canadians die to an opioid overdose. Men make up close to 80% of those deaths. In British Columbia, the province most hard hit by this crisis, drug overdoses now make up the leading cause of death for BC youth aged 10 to 18. All the while, the federal government seeks to maintain their status quo approach to promote so-called safe supply programs and repeating the slogan, "Safe supply saves lives." In addition to all of that, the BC government is now planning to give taxpayer-funded recreational fentanyl to minors with no minimum age listed. Fentanyl to kids. Where is this poison that's killing so many Canadians even coming from? Well, our next guest, a former undercover RCMP organized crime officer, says that China is waging a reverse opium war on the West, a drug war on Canada, and believes that organized crime groups through the United Front Work Department are supplying the poisonous precursor chemicals used to create fentanyl that's killing Canada's future generations. Well, joining us now is Garry Clement, a policing veteran of 34 years, a former undercover officer, investigator, and also the former national director of the RCMP's Proceeds of Crime program. He's also the author of the book Undercover: Inside the Shady World of Organized Crime and the RCMP. A link to that you can find in the description of this video. Mr. Garry Clement, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me, Harrison. I appreciate it.
In your latest column in the National Post, you say that the Chinese Communist Party is waging a reverse opium war on the West, a drug war on Canada. What, if anything, is the Trudeau government doing to protect Canadians and to save Canadian lives? Because from the data that we can see, whatever they are doing doesn't appear to be working.
Well, the problem is, and it's, people have to realize that we need in this country a multifaceted approach. And it starts with, first of all, the government accepting we have an issue. It's great. Everything we're doing, in my view, unfortunately, is a Band-Aid approach. And it's not really getting to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is when you take a look at what's happened over the last 15 years in Canada, we've had, court decisions like Stinchcombe, which is the mandatory of full disclosure in a timely manner. We've had Jordan, which mandates a speedy trial. And all of these things, it's great in theory, and it's great for the judges to make all these pronouncements. But that should have required our politicians to take some action. In other words, appoint more judges, make sure we have prosecutors that are capable of carrying it out. And then on top of that, you look at the situation, and we've got so eroded in our abilities to do federal enforcement. And for that, I'm pointing to the RCMP. I would say the last 15 years, they haven't showed up. Not through fault of their own, but there's a whole number of factors that go into it. It's not that they don't have the skills throughout the organization, but again, it goes to this proverbial problem. We need to wake up and recognize that, there's contract policing, there's federal policing, and the two are separate. And RCMP is supposed to be a federally mandated organization, but unfortunately, the priority has become contracts. And as a result of it, the federal side of the house has been eroded to a point where, as I said, we're not even a threat of any sort. And what does that cause? Well, that has caused, from 91 to 94, I was in Hong Kong. I witnessed through our very lax immigration oversight, numerous triads or Asian organized crime figures get access to this country. I wrote to the government and to the RCMP at that time that if we didn't get our act together, that Vancouver would end up becoming a transshipment point for all drugs into North America, and sadly now even into Australia, which meant it displaced Hong Kong, the Hong Kong that I knew from 91 to 94. All those things have come home to roost. We didn't take control of our ports. We allowed investments from Chinese investors. We've allowed so many Chinese individuals that are connected directly into the government of China to come to this country. They come with massive amounts of money, and unfortunately, we've got a number of individuals that are swayed by money, and I think that's become really evident. We're seeing it throughout this country. China has, really threatens their own diaspora because they want the Chinese people in this country to continue to support China and their goals. And so the obligations on, they will, they want to steal our intellectual property. And the drug problem, if you look at it, it's a disruption in North America of our society. And I've said for probably the last 5, 6 years that China's a communist country. If they wanted to shut down the trade, they could do it. So that should tell people something. So we've had these precursors, drugs coming in through Mexico, now direct to Vancouver, who's making fentanyl. And our drug situation, both in Canada and the United States, is pathetic. We haven't come up with a solution, and giving out free drugs, I think, will prove itself to be a fatal mistake. But we need to come up with some solutions. Probably the first solution we should come up with is get ourselves back in the international game board of being able to thwart some of this criminal activity, thwart some of this money laundering that's occurring. I mean, the Cullen Commission, I think, really highlighted just how weak a system we have in this country. We've done a great job of building up FinTrack, and I know Cullen, there was some criticism of it, but I can tell you they've built, and I use the analogy, we built a great Rolls Royce, being FinTrack, requiring financial institutions of all stripes to report into it. But what's the engine that's going to drive it? And that has to be prosecution and enforcement. But in order to have great prosecution and enforcement, we really need to strengthen our legal frameworks so that it's even capable of doing it. This arrest and immediately letting these people out on the street has proven, again, another fatality in this country, in my view. And it's not what we have to look at. If it was just China, you could sort of say, well, I think we can get this under control. But we are dealing with India now. We're dealing with Iran now in proportions that I don't think any of us ever thought would happen. We've got Russia. Russian organized crime is here. The number of organized crime groups that are active in this country is scary, to say the least. The problem for me when I look at it is it's terrible that we have become the transshipment point for drugs and money laundering throughout the world, and we're recognized now as that. And our government is not even given any a bit of confidence on the world stage today because of this. Where you look at the Five Eyes and what's happened, and for me that's disheartening. I could say when I was fortunate to be in the RCMP at the time I was in it, we had a tremendous reputation, both internationally, within our U.S. partners. I did training all over the world because we were recognized that we had that ability. That's not the case today, and that's sad. And all of us as Canadians, I look at the good analogy for people, from British Columbia to look at is the fight that's going on in Surrey about, maintaining the RCMP in Surrey. And, that's great in theory, and I respect what they're saying, but what they're missing the boat. Bottom line is, in 73, when I was in Langley, there was talk of a regional police service in the Lower Mainland. I mean, I think it's now time that proceed. And so that enforcement in British Columbia can be localized, it can be provincially generated. And then the public has to realize if that happened, there'd be resources to take on the federal problem that exists, which is massive. And if we don't take it on, that's an impact to all the municipalities and the province, and it's costing them a lot of money because we can't take it on. And, the latest thing is, the RCMP was trying to have direct entry into these specialized units. The units are the association filed a complaint with the labor board and won it. But all they did is kick the ball down the road. And sadly, they're short-sighted. The reality of it is, to the Canadian public, they want to see an ability to have a federal enforcement. And all they've done is delayed that. Well, that means we continue to be this weak link in the international chain. And I think those are the things that, government really needs to wake up to, but more so the public has to recognize that organized crime has cost them a lot of money in extra enforcement. We look at the drug problem. The drug problem is also backing up our hospitals, because every time you get somebody with an overdose rushing into an emergency ward, there's 4 people tied up that could be dealing with ordinary, real problems rather than a pandemic caused by what's happening in the drug trade, and principally through China. So those are the things that concern me. As you can appreciate, I've been doing this a lot of years. I'm still active, and I'm still active because I'm hoping by still being active, my voice can be heard a little bit, and that maybe we can get some support from our government leaders to recognize that we really have to take this on sooner rather than later. And I think I owe it to your generation. I owe it to my future grandchildren. I don't want to see the country that we're in today. I work in a bank today, and believe it or not, I'm seeing things there that are impacted by organized crime that is very disheartening. Would have never happened 15 years ago, but it's happening today. And it's happening because we almost have an open door policy. We've got to get our act together and get control of this. And don't get me wrong, I believe in some of the things that happened out of this woke philosophy, but it's gone way too far. Canada, the state has a right to protect itself. The state has an obligation to protect its citizens, and we can't continually bend to a silent minority. It's really impacting us. We can't continually bend to ethnic groups for their own ethnic focuses. I mean, we're Canada. We're one country. And I think it's time that we look at it from that perspective, and we start doing things what's to the betterment of the community.
Certainly. I want to get into the United Front Work Department and how their direct involvement in the illicit drug trade in this country is killing Canadians. Canadians will be familiar with the United Front Work Department through the stories about how they're operating Chinese police stations and their political interference, but maybe not necessarily as much about their organized crime activities. So, can you explain how exactly their involvement has allowed fentanyl to make its way deep into the interior of this country and ravage cities like Thunder Bay?
Yeah, it's sad, but I have to go back to the 90s again, when we started allowing all these individuals to come into this country. And basically what we did, very much like we've sat back and witnessed the Hells Angels create a network worldwide. That's exactly what happened in a situation like this. So United Front are located in most cities throughout Canada. They have ties to these individuals that are directly connected to organized crime. A lot of them are directly connected to the ruling party in China. So, in other words, a communist party. So, although they may not take total direction, it's not like it's a hierarchical role. The bottom line is they still have affiliations with Chinese organized crime, and they also help to control or try to control the Chinese diaspora in each of these areas. And so that's how all of this works. And as a result of it, the drug trade is just one of the ways that they make money that helps fund what happens in China. But I think there's another side of it that I was at I was in London. That's where our bank is located. I stayed at a hotel, and I was talking to this couple out of Richmond. They're of Chinese descent. We got talking, and when they realized that I understood the Chinese diaspora and I understood the triads and all that, they said to me, "Do you realize that most of the businesses in Chinese business in Richmond are having to pay protection money?" And I said, "Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That went on in Hong Kong when I was there." and it's just been transplanted over into our country. And if you were to ask most police officers, they wouldn't even understand it. They wouldn't even realize it. And because the Chinese diaspora do not believe that law enforcement in this country understand the threats that are against them, they're not going to go to the police. It's like Iranian citizens. They feel the same way. They don't believe we really understand it or we are really interested in doing something about it. So that's the reason all of this continues to grow and individuals are exploited.
Right. In December, the Washington Post wrote this long article about these Canadian fentanyl super labs, where Canadians are now building the synthetic fentanyl using chemicals sourced from China, and we're shipping them out to Australia and New Zealand. We're now involved in spreading this killer drug, which has been ravaging our own people. How has this been allowed to happen? How has it become the case that Canada is now in the fentanyl business somehow, despite the fact that we're trying to defend our own people from this drug?
Well, if you stop and think about it, Harrison, it goes right back to what I said at the outset. Where is federal enforcement today? When I started, and I think this sort of puts in perspective, when I started in Vancouver, we had a very large drug section dedicated to drug enforcement. We broke it out by the type of drugs. We were capable of taking on organized crime, and we would take on, at that time, I can remember we had some methamphetamine labs being set up. So we targeted them right away, and we shut down about a half dozen in very short order. But we had the resources. We had over 30 individuals, investigators who are capable of doing that. That doesn't exist today. And so what we're seeing, again, I go back to what I said at the outset, we need to get our federal house in order. And until we do that, we're going to see these type of laps spurring up. And so who does that responsibility fall to? Unfortunately, it falls to the municipal police forces. And they're already stretched to a max. Let's be honest. They have every other thing on their plate and they're stretched to a max. So we need to wake up and realize the RCMP has to stop being all things to all people. We need to look at what is it in this very complex world we live in today, in this complex world of organized crime. How do we end up with an organization capable of targeting transnational organized crime? And it sure will never be doing what they're doing today. It's not going to happen.
In your article, you say that in order to really solve this problem, the debate shouldn't be on safe supply programs. It should mostly be on trying to target and shut down the illicit supply. However, the federal government is sticking to their guns on safe supply. So is the BC government. So are other governments across this country. And BC just set a record this last year for the highest amount of illicit drug overdose deaths. Despite, the federal government will say safe supply saves lives, it's clearly not saving lives. And this has to be a serious problem for law enforcement officials at this point, right?
It is. And I guess I'm surprised as a country, and maybe it goes that everybody's, again, going back and looking for a Band-Aid approach. There's other countries that tried this and are admitting that it's a colossal failure. Why we jumped into this, I'll never know. I mean, let's face it. People that are on drugs, like fentanyl, that are hooked, are not capable of making an informed decision. My daughter works in the mental health field and she's dealing with it every day. So how do you deal with that? Well, if it's an individual on the street and they're going wild and everything, you're probably going to have them what they call formed, and you're going to have them in an institution to deal with that issue. I hate to say it, and I believe in the Charter of Rights and I believe in individual rights, but why do we continue to give more drugs, which is going to lead to more health effects, which is going to lead to more hospitalizations, and eventually a shortened lifespan, when we should be looking at how do we treat people and recognize that, in my view, and I saw it when I worked undercover in the streets with heroin addicts, they cannot make an informed decision on what they're going to do because the drug is the thing that drives them.
Well, the BC government now wants to give safe fentanyl to children and provide safe fentanyl, so-called safe fentanyl, to adolescents. I mean, talk about doubling down on a failed policy.
Well, and I think that's happened because whether it's true or not, but I've read a lot where a lot of the safe drug that is being handed out isn't strong enough for the committed users of fentanyl, so they're selling it to younger generations. If
Right.
that's the case, and I have no reason to doubt that that's happening, what is the end goal? I would really like to ask them when they start talking about safe drug supply, give me a response. What is the end goal for society? Because I can tell you, I don't think they have on there. They're looking at that Band-Aid and say, oh, look what we did. We did something, but it's not effective. It's not helping society, and it's only leading us down a path I don't think we want to be on.
Certainly. Well, to wrap up, Garry, if you could change one thing or make one major change to how the country deals with the illicit fentanyl crisis, the supply of illicit fentanyl, what would it be?
Well, I think first of all, I think we need I've said in a couple articles I've written that we really need powerful drug czar in this country that can liaise between law enforcement, or provincial and federal governments, that can make recommendations that have to be followed. And we need the RCMP to become a federal focused organization so that we can start getting a handle on this.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Garry. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Harrison. I do appreciate it. Take care now. Bye now.